Here is the text broken down row by row, after every full stop, comma, and question mark, as requested. Forget the headline number of $44 trillion in mineral wealth. That is merely the tip of the iceberg. The true value of the world's largest island sits closer to $87 trillion. I am not referring to potential mining profits, but to the cold, hard calculus of survival factoring in the shattering of monopolies, the domination of Arctic trade routes, and the containment of Eastern superpowers for the next half-century. This is not a conversation about real estate or political vanity. It is a conversation about the expiration date of American hegemony. The trajectory of global power is currently hurtling toward a cliff, and the only bridge across the abyss runs through a frozen wasteland that most people ignore. As we speak, the manufacturing backbone of the modern world is held in a vice grip by Beijing. 80% of the processing capacity for rare earth elements, the vitamins of modern industry, resides in China. Without these specific 17 metals, the assembly lines for F-35 fighters, precision missiles, smart devices, and green energy infrastructure grind to a halt. The United States cannot forge the shield of its defense, nor the engine of its economy, without permission from its primary rival. Greenland offers the escape hatch. The Conafield site alone houses enough raw material to sever the chain of dependence and reindustrialize the West. Yet this treasure remains locked under the ice, guarded by environmental bureaucracy in Copenhagen and political hesitation in Nuuk, while our adversaries tighten their hold on the global supply. This is the scenario that haunts the corridors of the Pentagon. The world's most potent military machine paralyzed because it cannot source the magnetic heart of its guidance systems. Access to Greenland is no longer a luxury. It is an existential imperative. And as we explore on the economic of fallen empires, when a superpower faces an existential threat, it alters the map to survive. By the end of this broadcast, I will demonstrate why the stars and stripes will likely fly over Nuuk within 5 years. We aren't dealing with speculation here. We are dealing with the inevitability of strategic math. Welcome to the calculus of power. Before we dissect the geopolitics, ensure you are subscribed and notifications are active. Leave a comment with your timeline prediction below. Let's see who is reading. The tea leaves correctly. We must begin with the elemental crisis, as it is the bedrock of this entire conflict. Statistics are so lopsided, they sound fabricated, but they are terrifyingly real. Elements like neodymium and terbium sound alien, yet they are the DNA of 21st century warfare. A single Virginia-class submarine requires over 4 tons of these materials. Every radar array, every satellite, and every laser guidance unit is built upon this foundation. Beijing dominates this sector, not by accident, but by design. While the West prioritized cheap imports and clean backyards in the 1990s, the East played the long game, absorbing the dirty business of processing until they owned the market. Now they are weaponizing that monopoly. We saw a preview in 2010 when exports to Japan were choked off, and again in 2019 with threats directed at Washington. The message was clear: no minerals, no military. For a decade, defense analysts have been sounding the alarm. You cannot compete with a rival who controls the inputs of your own weapons. Greenland fundamentally alters this math, with 15 million metric tons of oxides in just one deposit. The island is the key to breaking the cartel, but excavation is currently paralyzed by bans on uranium byproducts and local preservation concerns. While these are valid domestic issues for Denmark, they are rounding errors in the grand scope of American survival. When national security is on the line, ecological concerns are inevitably overruled by the necessity of defense. Then there is the $30 trillion variable that standard economic models ignore: the melting ocean. We are witnessing the birth of a new Mediterranean at the top of the world. The Northern Sea Route is not a future theoretical, it is an unfolding reality. As the ice recedes, the shipping distance between Shanghai and Rotterdam shrinks by 40%, shaving weeks off transit times and billions off fuel costs. This is the greatest shift in maritime geography since the Suez Canal was dug. However, this new superhighway hugs the Russian coast. To bypass Russian influence, China is branding itself a near-Arctic state, pouring concrete and capital into the region to secure its lane. This is where Greenland transforms from an island into a gatekeeper. Geographers call it the GIUK, gap, the stretch of ocean between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. In the last century, it was the net used to catch Soviet submarines. In this century, it is the toll booth for global commerce. Owning Greenland means owning the western wall of this corridor. It grants the authority to monitor, regulate, and if necessary choke off the flow of goods. Through the Arctic, Denmark, for all its stability, lacks the naval tonnage to enforce this bottleneck against great power rivals. They lack the capital to build the massive port infrastructure required to service this new trade route. Washington, however, sees the board clearly. Controlling this territory secures the trade arteries of the future and provides a lever to apply economic pressure on both Moscow and Beijing. Military logic is even more absolute. If you draw a straight line from a missile silo in Russia to a city in the American Midwest, that line cuts directly across Greenland. It is the geographic shield of North America. The radar installations at Pitchofik are the eyes of the Western Hemisphere, providing the precious 15-minute warning that stands between survival and annihilation. Currently, this shield operates on a lease from Copenhagen, a lease that is theoretically revocable. For a superpower, theoretically safe is synonymous with unacceptable risk. Sovereignty provides certainty. Furthermore, the island acts as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. From this vantage point, American air power can project force across the entire Arctic theater, reaching deep into Eurasia with minimal logistical drag. In a high-stakes conflict, Greenland is the forward operating base for air superiority and submarine warfare, leaving this territory under the administration of a small European ally. Vulnerable to diplomatic coercion is a strategic liability the U.S. can no longer afford. This aligns perfectly with the containment strategy we analyze frequently here on the Economic of Fallen Empires. China's Polar Silk Road is an attempt to encircle the West economically. They are buying ports, building icebreakers, and courting local governments from Reykjavik to Helsinki. Greenland is the missing link in their chain. If Chinese state-owned enterprises secure mining rights and build the airports, the Arctic becomes a sphere of influence for the East. The Arctic becomes a sphere of influence for the East. If America holds the title deed, that expansion hits a brick wall. Trump's interest in buying the island was not a random eccentricity. It was the crude vocalization of a quiet consensus within the deep state. Greenland is the cork in the bottle. Now look at the ledger skeptics balk at a potential purchase price of $100 or $200 billion. But they are looking at the expense column, not the investment returns. When you aggregate $10 trillion in inflation-adjusted mineral assets, $5 trillion in future shipping leverage, and trillions more in avoided defense costs and strategic positioning, the total value exceeds $22 trillion. Even at a premium price, the United States would be acquiring the asset for pennies on the dollar. It is not spending. It is the acquisition of the century. The unspoken truth in diplomatic circles is that Denmark is holding a winning lottery ticket it cannot cash. They lack the funds to develop the infrastructure, and the ruthlessness to override local opposition for the sake of geopolitics. Their strategy is a slow, subsidized drift toward eventual independence, a timeline that is too slow for the urgent reality of 2026. The Arctic is opening today. The resource war is happening today. Here's the roadmap for the next 5 years. Phase 1 is the squeeze. Controlling this territory secures the trade arteries of the future and provides a lever to apply economic pressure on both Moscow and Beijing. Military logic is even more absolute. If you draw a straight line from a missile silo in Russia to a city in the American Midwest, that line cuts directly across Greenland. It is the geographic shield of North America. The radar installations at Pitchofik are the eyes of the Western Hemisphere, providing the precious 15-minute warning that stands between survival and annihilation. Currently, this shield operates on a lease from Copenhagen, a lease that is theoretically revocable. For a superpower, theoretically safe is synonymous with unacceptable risk. Sovereignty provides certainty. Furthermore, the island acts as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. From this vantage point, American air power can project force across the entire Arctic theater, reaching deep into Eurasia with minimal logistical drag. In a high-stakes conflict, Greenland is the forward operating base for air superiority and submarine warfare, leaving this territory under the administration of a small European ally. Vulnerable to diplomatic coercion is a strategic liability the U.S. can no longer afford. This aligns perfectly with the containment strategy we analyze frequently here on the Economic of Fallen Empires. China's Polar Silk Road is an attempt to encircle the West economically. They are buying ports, building icebreakers, and courting local governments from Reykjavik to Helsinki. Greenland is the missing link in their chain. If Chinese state-owned enterprises secure mining rights and build the airports, we are already watching this unfold via trade negotiations and the quiet withdrawal of capital from Danish-led projects. The goal is to make the $500 million annual subsidy Denmark pays to Greenland feel like a heavy anchor on their budget. Within 18 months, Danish taxpayers will likely tire of funding a territory that offers no return. Phase 2 is the courtship. Washington will bypass Copenhagen to offer Nuuk, a deal they cannot refuse. Massive infrastructure stimulus, direct cash injections, and a status of free association that respects their autonomy while securing U.S. interests. When the choice is between stagnation under Danish rule or explosive growth under American protection, the 85% of Greenlanders who want independence will see a path forward. Phase 3 is the handshake. Once a referendum is passed, Denmark is checkmated. They cannot oppose the democratic will of the Greenlandic people without looking like colonizers. They will choose the dignified exit, a negotiated transfer with a massive payout. Copenhagen saves face, Nuuk gets development, and Washington gets the island. Whether it is labeled a territory, a protectorate, or a commonwealth is irrelevant semantics. The outcome will be American flags on the bases and American drills in the ground. This is not a wild prediction. It is the inevitable result of the equation. America needs what Greenland has more than Denmark needs to keep it. In the ruthless arithmetic of empires, that inequality always resolves in one direction. The $87 trillion asset will change hands. The strategic choke point will be secured. Strategic necessity does not care about your feelings or international niceties. It finds a way. Greenland will be American. The only variable is whether you are prepared for the shift. If this breakdown helped you see the board more clearly, smash the like button and subscribe. Check out my deep dive into how this move impacts NATO. Because the ripple effects, there are the next major flashpoint. Keep watching the Economic of Fallen Empires to stay ahead of the history books. I'll see you in the next one.